I'm about 6 weeks into chemotherapy for Hodgkins lymphoma, but this video isn't about where I'm at now. It's about the process that I went through from suspecting that I had a problem to getting treatment, because safe to say that period of time did not match my expectations, and there were steps and delays that I didn't anticipate, and this led to more stress than just the cancer diagnosis itself would have had. So I'm hoping that by sharing my journey, even though everyone's cancer is different, you need different specialists and different scans to me depending on the type of cancer you've got. You may have more access to specialists and other medical professions than I had. Even that being the case, it may be helpful to understand what the end-to-end picture looked like in my case, so that when you're partway through the process, you can start to think about, well, what else is going to happen? The main mistake that I made was to look at the next hurdle and imagine that it was the last. But there are a number of parts to this process that take time, and it would have been better if I was able to understand and accept that at the start. All right, for me, my worries started around about the 28th of July in 2025 when I found I had lumps in my neck that were more towards the front and lower down than I was used to. Like, everyone gets swollen lymph nodes, but I was used to them more being back sort of in line with my ear. So I had these nodes that were a bit different, and I was a bit worried about it. Not worried enough to immediately call the GP. I was feeling quite well, and so it took a couple of days with them not going down before I booked an appointment. I'd made the booking on the Thursday, the 31st, but because my GP is a busy guy and he's awesome, so he's hard to get into sometimes, I went and saw the GP on the Tuesday. I was thinking that would be fine, the lumps would go away, I'd probably cancel on the Monday, but they hadn't. If anything, they got bigger. I was starting to have a sensation when I was swallowing that I could feel my trachea or esophagus or something constricting. So I was more worried on the Tuesday than I was on the Thursday. But at no stage did I ring up and try and make the appointment more urgent. When the GP saw me, he immediately referred me for a CT scan. It was for a local imaging practice. That practice couldn't see me for a few days. So I rang around some more and I got an appointment that day with another one. And so I went in for the CT scan, and the very next day I got a call from my GP early on saying that he had the report. The report recommended that I follow up with a needle biopsy of lymph nodes in my neck. The biopsy needed another referral, so I rang back the same imaging practice and they were able to fit me in for a biopsy on the Thursday. So things were moving reasonably quickly up until that point. The biopsy was not a pleasant process. The doctor who was doing it in the practice, I asked him about how long it would take to get the results. And they have to send it off to a lab, and then lab technicians need to run stains over them, and they also need to look at the tissue under a microscope to look for abnormal cells. So the agreement they have with the lab is that they would get the results in 3 working days. So this was a Thursday, which meant Friday, Monday, Tuesday were the working days, and I was to expect the results on the Wednesday. I explained the problems that I was having in relation to my swallowing and breathing, and they agreed to mark it as urgent, but they explained that because it was another company, that was really all they could do. This is quite frustrating when you've got this chain of people and now there's somebody that you don't even know who they are and you can't talk to them. So as it turned out, I only had to wait until Tuesday when my doctor rang me really early, so 7:30 in the morning, not usually the time that I would expect a call if it was going to be good news. And of course the results he was able to say were conclusive for Hodgkins lymphoma. There's a particular type of cell that they can see called a Reed-Sternberg cell that has like a distinctive look to it. It's got multiple nuclei, whereas normal cells only have a single one. And there are other markers that are shown by dyes that they subject the sample to that indicate conclusively that I have Hodgkin's lymphoma. The lucky thing for me there is that it's a conclusive result. Other people's biopsies may show that there's other questions to be answered in order to narrow in on the type of cancer and location in the tissue that it exists in. So I know at this stage that I've got Hodgkin's lymphoma. And this was kind of as far ahead as I'd thought. I'd only really thought about, well, what happens if I get the news? I hadn't really thought about how it would play out. But naively, I thought because cancer grows rapidly and the longer you leave it, the harder it is to treat because it spreads more, that there's urgency around it. I naively thought that treatment might happen, that day or the next day, or you've got this cancer, we'll give it the treatment that cancer gets. But of course it doesn't work like that. The GP is not able to prescribe a treatment. You need some kind of specialist, an oncologist, a radiologist, a hematologist. Somebody else is making the call, or a team of people are making the call on what treatment is going to hopefully cure you. So of course you need a referral from the GP to the specialist, in my case the hematologist. And my GP knew a hematologist because he'd treated a family member and suggested that I see him, and I agreed. And so he sent off a referral and suggested that I follow up with a phone call once their office opened at 9 o'clock. So at 9:01 I call and think everything is going to play out. That day I'm going to see somebody and then we're going to start treatment. But what actually happened was I spoke to the receptionist. She confirmed that there was a referral, and the referral had been put in the hematologist's queue. So this is on the Tuesday. And the hematologist wasn't in the practice until Friday. He worked across multiple practices. So he would look at my referral on Friday. But then she went on to say that looking at the referral and getting an appointment were two separate things because there's a triage process associated with all of the other people who are having referrals sent through, and they're seen in the order of their urgency. And so at some stage after the triage process had occurred, I would receive a call to say when my appointment would be. I was kind of shocked and very disappointed at that point, and although I was polite, hopefully, I asked if there were other doctors in the practice that could see me, and the receptionist explained that there weren't. So my GP had said he's happy to send a referral to whoever I needed to see, if there was somebody that I knew of, or through a family member, or other research that I wanted to go through. He was happy to refer me. So I started doing some research. I rang up a couple of offices. The first one I rang up said that new patients were generally waiting 2 months to see the hematologist. And obviously I couldn't deal with that. Another one that I had found, who was recommended by a friend, had left the practice, and the practice that she was at turned out to be the same practice that I'd been referred to for the first hematologist. Another dead end. So then I spoke to other friends who had also started a journey with cancer but were a couple of months ahead of me. They recommended a clinic that's about an hour's drive away from here. It has like a one-stop shop for cancer where you've got oncologists, radiologists, hematologists, surgeons, and all of the scannings that you need. So I rang them and asked them, and they said yes, to get a referral sent through. So I had the referral sent through and rang back and followed up. By the time the referral had filtered down to the area that deals with blood cancers, I was able to speak to somebody there who confirmed that they have a triage process, and that in 2 days' time, on the Thursday, the triage process would run through all of the new patients. So I'm starting to get light bulbs turning on for me that I'm not the only person with cancer. There's more than a one-to-one relationship between patients getting cancer and specialists that need to treat patients with cancer, and therefore those specialists need to rationally, I understand, they need to have processes. But emotionally, I don't understand this at this time. I'm upset with the fact that there are delays. I continued to look for other options, but within the geographical region that I was at, there was a limit to how far a net I could go. So the Thursday came and I was hoping to hear back from the clinic that I'd spoken to, and I didn't. I rang that afternoon and I spoke to somebody who was aware of the triage process. They confirmed that I needed to wait until an appointment was made and that I would probably hear the next day. So the next day when my phone rang, I was thinking it was this clinic, but it was actually the first hematologist, the local one, that I was hoping to see. So he'd had a look at my referral and the scans that were associated with that and the biopsy results. And he'd instructed the receptionist to call me to make an appointment. And the appointment that she made was the following Thursday. So this was what I was focused on, was when am I going to see the hematologist? Because that's the next step. But what I wasn't aware was that there were other steps before that. And so I would need to go through scans in order for the hematologist to have information that would allow them to assess the stage of my cancer. And I understood the staging in Hodgkins lymphoma, and they needed to work out how many lymph nodes were involved, with the location of the lymph nodes, whether they were in both the upper and lower part of my body, or whether there was cancer spread to other parts. And the way they do that for lymphoma is with a PET scan. And there aren't a lot of PET scanners. The one at the public hospital was available the earliest, and it was on the Tuesday the following week. So again, over the weekend, I have to wait. Then I went in for a scan, and then the results were available to the hematologist, who I then saw on a Thursday. So this is 6 days after speaking to the receptionist on the Friday after the triage process. And we're now 22 days since I first started to get worried. So I see the hematologist, and he explains that I have stage 2A Hodgkins lymphoma. So it was only in the top half of my body, but it was reasonably extensive through my chest. He also explained that because of the extent of the nodes in my mediastinum and across the top of my chest and in my neck, that particularly the nodes that were close to my heart tissue and lungs would take out the option for him to recommend radiotherapy as well as chemotherapy. The chemotherapy for Hodgkin's lymphoma is a regime that was developed in the late 60s and has been curing people since then. So although there have been refinements over that time, it's basically the same set of 4 drugs. And so I thought, well, okay, I've got a well-known cancer type with a well-known treatment. When do we start? So he told me that we'd probably start the following Friday. So yet another week was to go past. And again, I had this misconception that the treatment could just start straight away because he knew what it was, he understood the stage, and therefore we could go ahead. But there were other steps that needed to happen first. First, I needed a blood test so they could determine a baseline for various things that they were going to need to monitor throughout my treatment. And I needed to start medication to reduce the swelling. So that happened the very next day. But then I also needed a heart function scan because of the location of the nodes. The heart function scan was booked for the following Tuesday. Again, it requires specialist equipment and couldn't happen straight away. And then the thing that I found most frustrating about the next steps was there was also a panel of doctors involved in the treatment of cancer locally who review one another's treatment plans, because what I didn't appreciate is how complicated even a straightforward diagnosis like mine could be in relation to the dosage of the different types of drugs and the timing of the dosages. And so these treatments can be irreversible. So once you start down a path, you need to continue it. And if it's not going to cure the cancer, then, potentially you could have gone another way. There's also the potential to use more chemotherapy or other means like radiation that cause long-term damage to people, and that needs to be assessed. So this balance of risks of treatment versus risks of not curing it needs to be handled in a way that gives the best outcome. And that may not be best done by a single human being, as it turns out. So they use this panel, meets on a Wednesday, and they review the treatments that are going to commence, then they go. So I was booked in at that stage to also see my hematologist on the Thursday so that he could tell me what the decision on the treatment and brief me as to what to expect. And then the next day, which is the 29th of August, was the day that I was booked in to start treatment. That's kind of the timeline that I'm going to leave you with. Like I said, I'm 5 weeks in, so I've had 2 more treatments after that, and I've got another one coming up this Friday, which will be my 4th. And then a PET scan will happen after that. That'll be the first scan since this one that I did back here on the 19th, to determine if the chemotherapy is progressing the way it's expected. And if it is, then the good news will be that I'll do another 4 months of chemotherapy so that they can be as sure as possible that I am cured of the cancer. Takeaways that I would give to myself back on the 28th. First thing would be to see a different GP to get a scan quicker. I doubt that I would listen to myself because I'm a guy and I tend to think health problems are going to sort themselves out. I would tell myself to try and understand the whole process, from scans at the start, initial diagnosis, additional scans to work out staging, and then review process for chemotherapy. If I had a picture of all of those steps needing to happen before treatment started, then I would have had less dissonance between my view that things weren't happening fast enough and the reality that a number of things needed to occur, and some of those things would take time to schedule. And if I had that knowledge, then I would have had a lot less internal friction and maybe not a lower level of anxiety, because I was anxious about having a life-threatening illness, but it would have gone some way for me accepting those days when nothing happened, that I wasn't failing at being a squeaky wheel, which I think you have to be. Like, you need to be as squeaky as you can be and as squeaky as you want to be. And I would also tell myself that I'm going to have phone calls where I get bad news that shocks me, and it shocks me out of asking additional questions because I'm focused on the bad news and I can't get past that. That stopped me from getting additional information at the time, which would have helped me in the days that followed regarding the delays. So I would have said, as much as possible, get to somebody who understands your cancer and how treatment and staging and diagnosis and the scans, how all of that works and what timeframes are reasonable. If possible, get someone to explain or do enough research to know that your internal urgency about how quickly things need to happen in order for you to get a successful treatment. Basically, how much time is reasonable to take at that. I'd also tell myself early on that there's a scarcity of certain scanning equipment and specialists, and that other people may have a more urgent need than I do. So I would try and have more empathy. So that's it. That's what it looked like for me. The slowest month of my life that I can recall. I'm going to make some more videos about my journey with chemotherapy and my understanding of the drugs and how they're going to hopefully save my life. So if you're interested in that, particularly if you're having ABVD chemotherapy and you have Hodgkins lymphoma, then subscribe or have a look at the playlist that I'll set up after the fact, and let me know if this helped. See you later.